Hello, good evening, Husky fans. Thank you for tuning in to the 23rd episode of Husky Dash. I'm your host, Nathan Mathisen, and today I'm going to be starting off the show just talking about, quite frankly, the amazing week that the Huskies had this past week, and then look ahead to their upcoming week, which they have one game this week. I'll then finish up talking about kind of just a few random statements and say whether or not I think they're overreactions or if I think they're possible and might be justified. Before I get too far into it, just a few bits of news. And I just want to mention this one because I was actually at it. The UW men's tennis team won their doubleheader against Western Washington or Eastern Washington this afternoon. And then some more just tidbits of information. 247 Sports released their final rankings for the class of 2021 recruits. UW has two of the top 247 recruits. Sam Heward, who finished as the five-star prospect and number 22nd recruit overall in the class of 2021. And then there was Owen Prentice, who's an offensive lineman. He finished at number 120 in the class of 2021. So hopefully both of these guys can make an impact for the Huskies down the road and have a good career here. Another bit of info is former Husky tight end Jack Yari was arrested in Murrieta, California on January 19th on charges of felony battery with serious injury and misdemeanor possession of narcotics. On January 7th, a UW spokesperson actually confirmed that Yari was no longer a member of the team. Yari had, of course, originally committed to USC as part of the class of 2020, but over the summer he decided to flip his recruitment to UW. Yari, however, was never actually present during any practices that media members were at, and he was never spotted on the sidelines of any games. All right, so now just getting into the topic at hand. What happened last week? Really, just one word to describe it is wow. I mean, what a week for Husky basketball. It was by far their best week of the year. I mean, they came into the last week dead last in the Pac-12. They were 0-7 in conference, and they left last week 2-7 in conference. So they went 2-0 last week, and they're currently the 9th ranked team in the standings in the Pac-12, at least last time I checked. So last week they played Colorado, who was 5-2 in conference and 11-3 overall. And they also played Utah, who was 3-5 in conference and 6-6 overall. So both of these games that they played last week were extremely close. Both of them really came down to the last couple of possessions. And that's really been kind of a theme in some of these games for the Huskies. That's now 6 of the Huskies' 14 games they've played, ending in single digits. But last week were the only 2 that the Huskies have been able to pull out and finish the game. So this team has shown, I guess, that they can compete. They may have started the season, quite frankly, horribly, maybe the worst possible start, going 1-11, I believe it was they started. But it was really just their season started because their shots couldn't fall, and that was a bit of luck, I feel. Now their shots are finally starting to fall. They're finally starting to make the shots that they're used to making and that they think that they can make on a consistent basis. And the teams the Huskies are playing are finally starting to shoot like the Huskies had been shooting to start the year, which is ice cold. The past game against Colorado this last week, Colorado made 1 3-pointer. They shot 1 for 18. In the previous matchup that they played against the Huskies, Colorado won that one 92-69, and Colorado went 8 for 20 from 3 compared to the UW going 4 for 18. This most recent game, the scripts kind of got flopped or swapped. Against Colorado last week, the Huskies shot 48% from deep, shooting 12 of 25. And then against Utah, their next game that last week, Huskies shot even better from deep, going 12 for 24, so 50% shooting. And really, I look at kind of the turning point of this Husky offensive showcase that you're seeing in these recent games as their game against Cal. On Cal, it was January 9th. It was really the turning point, I think, for this Husky offense to kind of figure out and kind of get in the groove of things and get some momentum building. Before the game against Cal, UW had only shot above 40% once from 3. And that was in their lone win against Seattle University. Now, during that stretch before Cal, so from really their first game against Baylor up until Cal, They had multiple games, to be exact, 3 games where they shot less than 20% from deep. Really, you can't expect to be competitive when you're shooting that poorly. Since the Cal game where they shot 50% from deep, their shooting percentage are as follows. They shot 39% against USC in that really blowout loss, and they shot 43.5% from deep in the close loss to UCLA. And then last week they shot 48% against Colorado and 50% against Utah. So really, the 5 most recent games for the Huskies are 5 of their 6 best 3-point percentage games. And I really think that's no coincidence now that this team is starting to compete, starting to be more competitive, and starting to win some games. It's because their shots are finally starting to fall. In an earlier episodes, I hammered the fact that this team can't win any games the way they're playing and the way they're shooting because their offense is just unwatchable. It can't keep up with any team in the Pac-12. They were constantly missing shots, and they just could never get anything going offensively. Well, now this offense, I'm not going to say is cooking or on fire, but they're starting to low simmer. They're starting to do better, and as you can see, the Huskies can win games when their offense is performing like it is right now. Now, I don't think I can really explain why the sudden offensive boost this team has gotten, other than they were unlucky to start the year, and luck's now on their side. Because if you look at the games to start the year and you look at the games now, really they're taking the same shots. Their offense is built around shooting the ball when you're open. So on all these kickouts, Quad A Green's getting to these guys in behind the 3-point arc. He was doing the same thing to start the year, only they weren't making it. Now he's kicking it out, and they're making the 3-pointers. Now, I'm sure Coach Hopkins made a point of effort to focus on the 3 and do some extra work on that at practice. And I'm also sure that a lot of these guys had been spending extra time before, after practice, just shooting around and trying to get a flow of things and get something going behind the arc. But I still think that luck kind of has turned to the Huskies side, and that's a good thing. Looking at who for the Huskies has really upped their game, I feel, and really helped them on this kind of hot streak they're on, I've got to look at Jamal Bay. He really hadn't been that present to start of the year. By that I mean he wasn't making the offensive impact that the Huskies expected him to and that the Huskies wanted him to. Recently, he's kind of gotten in a groove of things. He had such a great week last week. He actually won the Pac-12 Player of the Week. Against Utah, he had by far his best game of the year, maybe even in his career, as he had a career high in points and he shot extremely effectively. He shot 10 for 11, including 4 for 4 from 3. Add to his stat total of 5 rebounds, 2 assists, 4 steals, and a block, and I'd say that was his best game as a Husky. In the game against Colorado last week, he was just nearly as efficient, shooting 5 for 8, 2 for 3 from deep. He didn't quite shoot as much, so he didn't quite score as much. He scored 14 points overall that game. But really, Bay hit his stride following that 2 for 10 performance he had against UCLA. So if Bay can keep shooting efficiently, then I think this Husky team can keep improving and keep getting better because, like I said, Quad A Green needs some help because he can't win these games by himself like he tried to do to open the year. Another person who's been really there for Quad A Green and helping him out these last few games is Eric Stevenson. He's someone who I kind of talked negatively about earlier on, as he wasn't really showing up at all. I can't exactly recall what his stats were then. I want to say he was averaging around 4 points per game, 5 points per game, while playing 20 minutes a game. So really nothing to jump for joy, really nothing to be proud about. But these past few weeks, it is something to celebrate. He's really flipped the switch. And this is what the Huskies expected from him when he transferred from Wichita State. They expected him to be someone who can shoot the ball with consistency and just overall score the basketball. And again, like how this whole team's performed, since that Cal game, that's when he started performing well. Before the game against Cal, he had 0 games where he scored over 10 points. He'd hit 4 3-pointers all year long and had a total of 34 points scored on the year before the Cal game. Now, just looking at the Cal game alone, he hit 6 3-pointers. So he hit 2 more 3-pointers than he'd hit all year. And he scored 27 points in that game. And in the 4 games since the Cal game, he slowed down a bit. But overall, he's still playing great. He hasn't scored less than 10 once in those 4 games. In the 5-game stretch from the Cal game up until this game against Utah most recently, he hasn't scored, or he's hit 18 3-pointers. That's what he was supposed to be doing all year long. That's why people were excited when he transferred here to UW. So it really took some time for Stevenson to get comfortable with the Huskies and to get in the flow of things. But I think he's finally comfortable. He's finally playing well. He's finally hitting his shots, and he's finally living up to his potential that he came to UW with. So if he can keep that up, then this Husky team can keep on winning. Now, moving on to the next topic, it's going to be looking at this upcoming game that the Huskies have, which is against Washington State. It's at home, and it's this Sunday at 5 p.m. So Wazoo's kind of an odd case. They started off the season kind of on fire. They opened the season 9-1. They were 2-1 in conference play. But since that first 10 games of the year, they haven't won a game. They're currently on a 5-game losing streak. Haven't actually lost to Colorado, the team the Huskies just beat, and Utah, the team the Huskies beat. So the question I'm looking at is, what do the Huskies have to do to keep this winning streak alive and to beat the Cougars? So I think the first point, or the first key, is really simple. It's just to keep making 3-point shots. Keep making the shots they're making and keep this flow going. Keep the confidence flowing in these players. If the team can keep doing that, what they've really been doing for the past 2 weeks, then I think that's enough to keep them in the game and keep them within striking distance, and it'll just be about finishing, which the last 2 games were the first time they did that. So if they can keep shooting, keep finishing games, then I think that the Huskies can be competitive against the Cougars, and I think they can beat the Huskies. When the Huskies have shot over 30% from deep, they're 3-4. So looking at that stat alone, that's not really a great record. But then again, 30% really isn't something to be happy about when you're shooting that from 3. It's not that great of a percentage. However, in those 4 losses, only 1 of them has been by more than 6 points. So my point here is the Huskies can shoot, if they can just shoot decent or below average, like just a bit below average, not like in some of these games where they're shooting 25%, 17% from 3. If they can shoot a little over 30% from 3, then they should be able to be in the game, and it'll just be about finishing the game. Because shooting can put you in a position to win games. But what wins those games is the team's defense. The Huskies' defense must show up on a more consistent basis. Against Colorado and Utah, the Huskies' defense was playing great for the majority of the game. The defense did what it's supposed to. It kept them within striking distance throughout the game, never letting the lead get too far away or too big. And this then allowed it so when the offense of the Huskies finally struck a groove, got some momentum going, got some confidence going, and made a run for the lead and took the lead, then they were able to do that. And then the Huskies defense kept playing good even when the offense was also playing good. So both their offense and defense were playing good. This is what happened against the Colorado and Utah game. However, against the Cal and UCLA game, the defense played an okay game, solid game. But when the offense made a run in those games, the Huskies defense kind of took a step back, which that then allowed for Cal and UCLA's offense to then keep the pedal to the metal and keep scoring points, making it so that the Huskies couldn't end up winning the game. And that's what happened. The defense wasn't able to stay strong towards the end of those games. So against the Cougars, if the Huskies want a shot at winning and want a chance to beat them, then the defense is going to have to be consistent throughout the game, and especially at the end of the game. So really overall, my main point here is just that the offense of a team, it'll keep you in the game. If you have a great offense, you're going to be in games more often than not. But defense is really what's going to win the game for your team and get you places. An example is kind of in the NBA, it would be the Houston Rockets. Not this year, but in years prior, probably the last 3 or 4 years before now, their offense was always electric. They had one of the best offenses in the game, putting up huge numbers and breaking shot records for 3-pointers made and attempted in games. Really, what did that get them? I mean, it didn't get them a championship trophy, as their defense was always lackluster and consistently held them back. Which that then, when a defense can't be good and can't be counted on, then if the offense has a lackluster game one night, then there's no way that you possibly able to win, because you know the defense isn't going to be able to keep them in it. So having no defense really just puts an absurd amount of pressure on the offense. That's why if the Huskies are going to keep winning, they need their defense to keep playing great defense and just keep improving game in and game out. So now moving on, my third topic, it's something, an overreaction or believable. So I'm going to be looking at a few statements that I've seen come up and just thought of myself. And I'll be saying if I think it's an overreaction or if I think that's a proper reaction. I think that's a believable statement. So the first one is just the Huskies can make a run at the Pac-12 tournament. So a couple weeks ago, you would have not even thought about this, not even thought about it at all. And right now, I mean, based on what they've performed in the last week, I have to say it's possible. I still don't think it's super likely, but it is possible they do that. And I'll explain it just by, you look at the top teams in the Pac-12. You got UCLA, USC, Colorado, and Oregon. Now, the Huskies narrowly lost to UCLA. A few defensive stops and a couple made shots, the Huskies would have beaten the top team in the Pac-12. And you look at the game for the Huskies against USC, it was a blowout. There's no really way to sugarcoat that. I don't think the Huskies can beat USC, but that's really the one team that I don't think the Huskies can beat. As they beat Colorado, so they've shown they can beat them, and against Oregon, they narrowly lost, losing by, I believe it was 3 points a handful of weeks ago, that was. So the Huskies really have the skill, they have the players, they have the coaching to beat some of these teams. Like I mentioned, I don't think they can beat USC just because of the matchup really favors USC, with the big, tall Mobley twins kind of being the keys for USC and the Huskies not being able to match up size-wise with them. But against all the other teams in the Pac-12, I feel the Huskies match up nicely. I think if the Huskies can keep the way they're shooting against these teams and play their classic solid 2-3 zone defense, then they can win any game. And for that reason, I think it's possible for them somehow to find themselves winning the Pac-12. I'm by no means saying it's plausible, but based off of the last few games, maybe the last 2 weeks, I'd say there's a chance, and there's probably a better chance than a lot of people are thinking when they just look at their record and they think back to how they started the year and how they had been performing up until the last few weeks. So that one's possible. I'm not saying it's likely. Now, the next statement is just Huskies should fire Mike Hopkins. Now, I touched on this a couple episodes ago, and at that time I thought the Huskies should fire Hopkins and just move on. Since then, the Huskies are 2-2. Their 2 losses was one close one to UCLA and a blowout to USC. That hasn't changed my mind. I still have that same mindset as 2 weeks ago, where I think the Huskies need to move on from him. I look at it similar to what I talked about last time. He wasn't able to win with the top-ranked freshman class, and he hasn't been able to recruit since then, as I don't think freshman players really want to play with Hopkins. But really, can you blame them? I mean, if I was a 5-star freshman looking at what school I want to go to, I'd kind of look at what that school has done in the past with freshman talent. And if you do that with UW, it's not a very good track record. Looking at what the Huskies did with DeJounte Murray, they didn't win many games. Looking at what they did with Markel Fultz, they didn't win many games. And now with Mike Hopkins, it's the same old story. Coaching Isaiah Stewart, Jaden McDaniels, two top 8 players in their class. Huskies didn't win many games. Huskies have really never won with youth. So there's no real history of the Huskies taking a 5-star freshman and winning like other programs have been able to do. So why would a 5-star freshman really want to come here when a lot of these freshmen are thinking it's just going to be one and done for them? So they don't want to spend the years practicing with the Huskies and just working to get to that NCAA championship. They want to just come here for a year, be competitive, maybe win the Pac-12 or maybe win the NCAA tournament and then head to the NBA. So that's why I think the Huskies need to move on from Hopkins. Just he's not getting these young kids to buy in, I think. So I think the Huskies need a coach who can recruit these guys and who can get them to buy into the program. Because Hopkins' last 2 recruiting classes, looking at the class of 2020, he had 0 recruits originally. I believe he got kind of a late one who came in, last name Penn, I believe it is. Don't recall his first name. He's a guard. I think he's joined the team by now. But he was just like a 3-star, I believe. So not a real splash signing. And currently in the class of 2021, the Huskies just have 1 player signed or committed, I believe it is, and that's a 4-star center out of Washington, but he's only 200 pounds. So I don't see him coming in and making a huge impact either. So recruiting for Mike Hopkins has been lackluster, and you can't win in college basketball with lackluster recruiting unless you're able to truly develop players and build them into something special. So can Mike Hopkins do that? Well, short answer is no. Looking at the best example for this, it would, in Mike Hopkins' time at UW, it would have to be Nas Carter. He came into UW in the class of 2017 as a 3-star prospect. But last year, alongside Stewart McDaniels, Carter was likely the Huskies' 3rd best player, but very possibly you could argue on-court performance, he was the Huskies' 2nd best player. Unfortunately for the Huskies, he had to leave the program due to off-court issues and things that came up. But really, that's it for Mike Hopkins' success stories. Ahonis, who's a 3-star prospect from last year's class, yeah, he's looked nice at times, and maybe there's something with him. Maybe he can keep building, keep improving. But overall, he hasn't been anything to really be super excited for. He's shown very small glimmers of excellence, putting up big numbers in 1 or 2 games this year so far. But then there's also games where he can't even find the court and get out there. So he's got to keep being consistent, and maybe he can be a good developmental project. But right now, there's not much to him. Then looking at 4-star Raekwon Battle, he's kind of the worst project, I guess. The worst look for Hopkins is he came in with a bunch of hype, and all that's happened since then is him regressing, struggling to find time on the court at the moment, and he hasn't developed into that sharpshooter that the Huskies really expected him to be when they signed him. Now, another guy to look at would have to be Jamal Bay, who was a 4-star prospect in the class of 2017, and he hasn't developed into a superstar either. Now, he's a good rotational player. He clearly has had his moments. He's clearly had his bursts of excellence. But again, with him, it's about being consistent game in and game out. And maybe he can finish this year being consistent. He showed it for a week. And he keep doing that for 2 weeks, for 3 weeks, for 4 weeks. So it's going to be wait and see with him. But so far, Hopkins hasn't shown being able to develop players. He hasn't shown that he's able to recruit well. So it's not an overreaction. I think Hopkins doesn't really deserve to have a job next year here at UW. Now, the next real point I'll be talking about is, are the Huskies a good 3-point shooting team? And I think this is an overreaction. So what? They've had a few games where they've shot well from behind the arc. When I'm looking at and saying a team's a good 3-point shooting team, I have to have a bigger sample size than just the past 5 games. And looking at the whole season, the Huskies aren't a good 3-point shooting team. They are currently shooting 32% from behind the arc, which that's nothing to really celebrate about. But I mean, you look at before that, before this 5-game stretch and burst of playing right from behind the arc, they were shooting around 23%, 22% from deep, which I can't say a team's a good 3-point shooting team if that's what they were doing a couple weeks ago. And really the key with that is just the Huskies don't have very many consistent career good 3-point shooters. Jamal Bay, he has his hot streaks, and he's been shooting well this year. I'll have to give him credit for that, shooting 51% from deep. But if you look at last year, he only shot 25% from deep. So I don't know how much longer he can really hold this great shooting percentage he has. Marcus Ahonis is probably their most consistent shooter. He shot 41% from deep last year, and he's actually shooting the same from this year. But again, it's not the biggest sample size with last year, him having only shot ball 24 times, and this year he's shot it 51 times. So maybe Sahonis is their most consistent shooter, but again, I want to see him hold that shooting for the rest of the year and keep making an impact on the court, as again, he's a guy who's falling out of the rotation some days, and some days he gets a lot of playing time. He's got to really fit into the Huskies. So I'm not really saying that the Huskies don't have any good 3-point shooters, because I think they do. They have some guys who can definitely make 3-pointers, but that's the consistency aspect that I'm looking for to be more strong for the Huskies before I can call them a good 3-point shooting team. Now, the last statement that I'm going to be looking at is Jamal Bay is the best Husky player. As of recent, you could say yes, but I think this is an overreaction. He's been good. He's been really good these last week, maybe 2 weeks. But the Huskies' best player is still Quade Green. I've said it on here before that I'm a big fan of his, and I think he's a great player. So maybe I'm a little biased just from my previous liking of him. But when it comes to looking at the stats, they completely back up my stance. Now, I've heard people criticizing Green recently with him not shooting the best percentage, but he keeps on hiking up high shot numbers. But I feel that criticism isn't really warranted, as what he's trying to do is put this team on his back, as there hasn't been many games where anyone else is there putting up shots and making them. So he's got to just shoot them because he is their best player, their best scorer. Green's currently leading them by far with 15.4 points per game, compared to the person averaging the second most, which is Jamal Bay, but that's only at 9.4 points. So that's a 6-point differential between the leading scorer for the Huskies and second leading scorer. Green is also then leading the team in assists with 3.5 and steals with 1.2 per game. And looking at Bay's great game against Utah, Green also that game had a very nice game, kind of get overshadowed. Against Utah, Green shot 7 for 14, so 50%, and 4 for 5, so 80% from deep. He scored 20 points, go alongside 4 rebounds and 4 assists. So overall, Green's kind of been their most consistent and just best player for the Huskies. He's shown up in the most games, and he's shown up in games when not a single other Husky player has shown up. Okay, so that just about finishes up all the time I have here today. Once again, I'm Nathan Mathisen. You can follow me on Twitter with the @ that you see on screen right now. Now, I'm just a small part of the Dash Sports family, so if you'd like to meet the rest of the crew, check out our website, Dash Sports TV. Now, if you'd like to revisit the best moments of today's episodes, or any episode for that matter, head over to our website, where you can find clips, quips, tips, rips, terrible jokes, and as many full episodes as you can stand, all in one place, all for free, dashsports.tv. I'll see you next week with more Husky basketball news. But for now, this is Husky Dash signing off. Thank you.